It'll be done before you know
Ready?
it.
Call the Stuart Municipal Utilities Council Chambers meeting to order, agenda Thursday, April 11th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. We'll do roll. Crawford.
Here.
Jones. Here. Sherman. Belden.
Here.
Amy here. Agenda approval, consent agenda, minutes of regular meeting, 3/14/2024, financial statement as of 3/31/2024, and bills as presented. We'll need a motion.
Sorry.
Okay. Crawford.
Yes.
Jones. Sherman.
Yes.
Avey, yes. Utility, property, and liability insurance.
We received a line requested some information from our insurance company, and we provided Scotland in the back. So it talks about the deductible. Go ahead.
No, I just, to try to bring the premium increase down with our costs going up. Did you guys see the differences or any interest in them or not? That I wasn't for sure how to take there's property deductibles and then commercial output for program deductibles. I didn't know if the property would be separate from auto. Is there an auto deductible as well, or is that supposed to be the same thing? Because I asked Ash what the historic claims were, and there were 2 autos in the last 7 or 8 years and 1 had a weather claim. Well, statistically, we're not probably going to get another weather claim while I'm above grade, but so I didn't know if there was any interest in anybody wanting to raise deductibles. The savings between the two is $6,700, $68 to go to the highest one, and $2,500 to go to $10,000 from 5. So if you don't have any claims, you're gaining $2,500 every year. By going to 10,000, and you're gaining $6,800 every year without claims. But just
Insurance always is kind of.
it's a must-have. Nobody wants. Yeah, it's a must-have. Nobody wants. But
Yeah, you kind of, it's a judgment call. You don't know what you expect. Having higher deductible saves money a little bit, but your car, you can have higher deductible and deal with it happy. So there's no right answer to it.
no,
Good or bad to it.
right. Well, we did. I mean, it worked out for several years with no claim.
It did.
The way our costs are on this side of the house is very limited on what we can and can't do.
So it's kind of, like I said, there is no right answer to it. It's
Is there any
judgment call.
Is there any comfort going to the middle ground, not to the 25, but to the 10, and save $2,500?
I would.
Okay.
I mean, I just done the same thing myself.
Yeah, same. I'm with you. Yeah, your insurance rates go up on your car, or your house. You did. I mean, good comparison.
Yeah. So you want to go with that?
Is there comfort at 25,000, or does that seem too high? That seems pretty high to me. Okay. And then the only thing I'd ask about is, this is commercial output, and this is property. Is there another one for auto that we haven't looked at yet? If both of these 2 claims are from 19 to 20, and they're at $3,600 paid, that would fall under the 5. So it probably would make sense to change that one in.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
I looked at that. So what would you like to do?
I mean, I'd be fine going to the 10 if that was agreeable to everybody else to save $2,500. I mean,
I would too. Okay, we need
in
a
the middle of
motion.
the road.
We need a motion.
I'll make a motion.
By Shirley, seconded by Dave.
Neil, have you had time to look at this information, or are we rushing it?
Nope, I've seen it. I'm looking at it right now as well.
Okay.
Okay, Crawford.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Sherman.
Yes.
Belden.
Yeah.
Avey, yes. Xenia rural water rate increase, water rate analyst Chip.
Good evening. So the material that I handed out
is intended really just to be an introduction to how the utilities might approach the water rate adjustment that you had placed upon you from Xenia. There's some initial information that I plan to go over tonight, and then at the May meeting, perhaps we can get into a little bit more detail. But there's a lot of moving parts to this, and have met with Pat and Ben and have some kind of a concept of some initial scenarios to go over, and I just need to finish those out in more detail for the May meeting. So I'll just review the first page that lays out Exhibit 1. Lays out what your rate adjustments have been from Xenia as a bulk water purchase since 2016. And there's history laid out for each year. And when you add those up together at the right center of the table, the cumulative amount is roughly 58%, including an 11.36% rate increase effective May of 2024. Last year's increase was 10%, and the prior 2 years were just under 10% at roughly 9.5% and 9.7%. So your bulk water cost from 2016, it was $3.37 per 1,000 gallons. Now it's roughly up $2 to $5.39. And Ben's done a nice job about pointing out, if you look at row 4, the rate, what's the impact of the Xenia increase? It's based on a per 1,000 gallons adjustment. So that adjustment from 4.84 that's currently in place to the upcoming 5.39, that's roughly 55 cents or so. So what is important, I think, to maintain, in what Ben's pointed out, is you want to maintain that. You don't perhaps necessarily have to increase your meter charge 11%, but increasing your per 1,000 gallons 55 cents is a good approach to that, which 55 cents on your user rates is not 11%. So is that a good description of it? It's kind of how you think about it. So
Wasn't that during a time period where we were deleveraging as well? So we had that flexibility more so to make those ad hoc adjustments with a lower debt payment. Now with a new debt payment from our water project, we're not going to have that elasticity to have those judgment calls. So
you'll have to be, I think the more detailed cash flow will bear that out. So I'll get to that. Exhibit 2, this is what you have charged local Stuart water customers. And up until June of 2022, the rate tiers for customers in the residential tier and commercial were both the same. In the column I at the right side of the table, that's when there was kind of the two tiers were broken apart. And if you look at just your basic user rate sheet for June of 2022, that's where you see that broken out. So in row 11, that row points out that, that tier for 10,000 to 1.6 million gallons, that was raised 25% in 2022. The rest were about 1%. And you can see a different meter charge than for commercial effective for 2022 versus residential. So that's kind of a distinction. Everything in column H and to the left is the same. And am I depicting that correctly from what you guys, does that sound accurate to you? I think that's, yes. So that's what I had in all my notes, and it's, there's a lot to sort through there. So I think what is worth pointing out, and maybe this gets a little bit to your question, yes, the debt payment is higher, but what you have been able to do, you've incurred a 58% increase, but your increase on local Stuart water customers has been 21%. You've been able to do that for several reasons, I think. You've had increased sales and gallons sold, more customers, and you've just been, I think, careful with your expenses in the water fund. If you look back a number of years ago, I can't remember how many, but the water fund was in a deficit balance. So it's in much better shape as it is today. So looking at the next exhibit, Exhibit 3, and this is where folks might have some approach I take for more detail at the May meeting. This lays out some different approaches that I've talked over with Pat and Ben. So what's attached in Exhibit 4, a subsequent handout, is to adjust just the per 1,000 gallons amount, 55 cents, which is about 4% on your local bills to keep you whole from the Xenia water increase. So on your bills that you charge customers, it's roughly 4%. It's not 11%. It's 11% to you if you just compare the rate per 1,000 to prior year. So trying to keep that meter charge the same, then would be the theory or the goal of that approach is consumption only. That's right. And I think the theory kind of with keeping the meter charge equivalent is the cost to connect a customer hasn't really gone up. It's just the water cost of bulk water.
It hasn't been taken before in the last few years that you had shown here, right?
No, it's been a whole, from 2022, it was not a flat wholesale across the board adjustment. The prior years have been that way, where each usage tier or base meter charge is adjusted the same percentage. That there was a different approach taken where it was focused on more of the 10,000, 1.6 million gallons. The usage adjustment was focused on that tier. So scenario B, it's proposed to this is in the works, not completed yet, but is to focus on adjusting residential per 1,000 gallons rate, the gallons rate, roughly 1% to 2%, similar to what you did in 2022, and focusing more on the commercial customer, perhaps looking at a 5% adjustment for them. And then taking a look at the meter charge or the base charge, and looking at residential at 1% and commercial at 5%. So what's in scenario C then is to take more of kind of more of a flat across the board approach, looking at a 3% for both commercial and residential applied to the per 1,000 gallon rate and the meter charge. So does anyone have any other scenarios that you would want to perhaps see for the May meeting? Does that cover what you were thinking about, or is there?
If you remember last year, the mindset was to not hit our residents, our taxpayers, utility customers with such a large increase versus business side.
So the next sheet is a little bit out of order, but it's just a heads up, kind of looking at the May meeting. There'll be two separate long-term USDA financings. The first one at 4.9 million will be at a 1.5% interest rate. That was the original amount in the September of 2020 letter of conditions from USDA. And then there's an additional amount of $1,748,000 that's at 2%. So there'll be two financings just in preparation for your May meeting. Those are short-term matures June 1 of 2024. That's that. Just kind of a heads up on that. And then
I guess going back to those different scenarios, are there other utilities that have a different approach to these rate increases that would be creative or useful to look at or consider?
I think if you really wanted to dig into it and look at it on a cost of service basis, and that's something you probably want to work with an engineering firm on, a different approach, and that's going to be a very expensive rate study. So a different approach could be, you could look at what are your water customers' costs at the various usage tiers that they're at, and that might involve reworking your user tiers. It's any option is on the table. I think what some utilities are going for is either you basically to do a flat per 1,000 gallon rate no matter what usage tier you're at. Others even start to charge more expensive on a per 1,000 gallons rate the more that you use, trying to promote water conservation. So
Thanks.
those are other ideas. what Exhibit 5 is, and it's 2 pages. What I want to try to do is expand it and add more years for next month, but it looks at, let's kind of step through what it includes. At the top is the water gallons sold historically in row 2. You can see in fiscal year 15-16 toward the left, your gallons sold was about 52.2 million. You're, well over 20 million gallons higher than that for fiscal year 22-23 at about 74 million. So that's in large part of a lot of where your growth is. You benefited from growth on that regard. User shown. The historic rates for both residential and commercial, as I mentioned earlier, were the same. That's in rows 6, 7, 8, 9. That's combined historically, and then where commercial is broken out, beginning in fiscal year 22-23. That's beginning in row 10. Your number of customers is totaled in row 14. You can see in 15-16 you had just under 800 customers. Now you're at about 930 customers if you go toward the right side of that blue shaded area. So rough numbers. Shoot, 30 customers. That's great. Okay, so your operating revenues, 15-16, if you look at row 24, you were at about 805,000. And for your most recent audited year, fiscal year 22-23, you're at $1,415,000. An increase of roughly, 6. So the next page lays out historic expenses. I break out the Xenia bulk water purchase expense from every other expense, just because I know that's such a key item of focus for the board. So row 27 is the bulk purchase water cost. That's of course influenced by how many gallons are purchased, as well as what the rate per 1,000 gallons is. And the note in row 25 that lays out what the percentage change has been from year to year. Again, not just driven by the rate, but by how many gallons. Your operating income, just taking gross revenues less operating expenses, that's in row 34. That's increased nicely. You're at roughly 561,000 for fiscal year 22-23. And if you look at the gray shaded row 42, your net revenues for debt service, that, in fiscal year 15-16, that was about 245,000. That's 581,000 for fiscal year 22-23. Your debt service payments are listed out then beginning in row 43. Historically, the debt service was about 179,000. When we did the refunding in 2021, the purpose was to lessen those debt service payments to help build some reserves just in preparation for the 2 projects that you have going on. So that then the debt service is around 115,000 or so. Your future debt service payments broken out between the 2 segmented debt issues. That's kind of why I listed that prior page. Those are shown in rows 46. I've assumed, and they're, the debt issues are structured initially as 40-year terms. So I've assumed you keep the 1.5% debt issue outstanding for the full 40 years. I'm happy to adjust that however you see fit. The higher rate debt, which is still incredibly low at 2%, I've assumed you pay that off over 30 years. So
Before we go anywhere, I'm just dividing just to revisit this, row 55, which is no income after debt service, is 333,746 for year 2025. Dividing that into row 24 of 1.492 million, and that's 22%. So if you look at that for the year of 23 with the old debt payments, that was 466,286 divided by 1415333. So we went from a profit margin of 33% before this project to 22%. That's all I wanted to get at is, and it gets at our flexibility. I was trying to get at our payments go from, it's basically like you said, it goes from 115 on the debt service on 47 in 2023 to 243,000 the following year. So, is there a ratio this should be at, Chip?
Row 53, I think is what, I know the USDA debt is not bond market debt, but if you're in the bond market and looking at what a debt service coverage ratio is, row 53 looks at how many net dollars for debt service are available versus the debt payment. That historically, just pick 17, 18, that was 1.97%. If you look at, so this kind of runs counter to what the point you just made. And the reason is that there's more revenue available for debt is the bottom line versus the debt payment. You can see in the future years, like in the second column from the right, FY 25, 26, that's at 2.45 times roughly.
So should that be at 2.5, or I guess is there a ratio they like that's?
You wouldn't want it to be, I think, below 1.5 times.
Okay.
So it's financially, frankly, it's pretty healthy where it's at in the forecast years. Now, if you change the amount of debt that's paid on the USDA debt that's to be issued, that changes everything significantly.
But when we're operating, I guess my point is in 22 and 23, we're operating at 4.8 and 5, 2 times what you're recommending at 2, and then this debt gets stuck in here, it drop back down to 2 and 2.5 liquidity wise.
That's correct.
That's all. I'm getting.
Still a good coverage ratio though.
I'm not, yeah,
But
I'm
it's
just saying
narrower.
that
It is.
flexibility of the increased revenue that we looked at on pages, that first exhibit with the lower rate increases, it gives us less flexibility to not pass rate increases on.
It does. So I think that's something to consider as well. If you think about what your cash in the bank is earning that's probably 4% on part of it. It certainly got to be above 3.5%. Any sense on what that?
2 to 3.
So is there, like Marcus, Goldman Sachs has markets, right? Is that, of anything available market wise that can get 4%?
There's there are investments in IPay that are paying a pretty good rate. A lot of times those are CDs, so you have to ladder those out. Those can get up. You can get over 5% with those.
So does that inhibit, or, since their CDs are locked, are we in CDs now? So is it better to do those higher rates, or?
Remember on the city side, we try not to go that route. Remember?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but
I'm not saying we
We try
did.
not to go that route if I can.
Oh, what?
We try not to go that route and we kept it here at the local bank. 3 4 more years later, you and I found out that we were right to keep it here because of what's going on.
Bond, that was the bond bust.
Yes.
I think- Bank though.
Well, that's where we're at right now.
If you're gonna earn, let's just pick a rate 4% with the CD, and your debt's at 2%. Frankly, it doesn't make sense to pay that. As long as that dynamic exists, it's odd, but it just doesn't make sense to pay that debt off early.
To me, yes,
What are our
that's my
dollars?
stand.
And I should probably have this, what are our dollars that are being tied up into that reserve?
So that's just kind of an introduction. There's more detail to come in May.
This is good information.
This is kind of a start. And, I think that the key decision point is how do you approach the user rate adjustment for your utility customers in light of what's in this W cards. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
We talked about alternative studies and things that Chip was gonna look at, wastewater treatment plants, solar and those types of things. After, of course, we have to do something similar in the engineering side. And so, can you put some sort of template together or talk to us about what that process would be? Understand it, if there's any alternatives out there to consider.
So I understand there's some interest from the board, or I'm asking if there's interest from the board, to look at, Xenia's rates have been going up 10% every year. And, you know, I don't know, it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when you went to Xenia, went away from the Redfield wells and went away from producing your own water and hooked into Xenia. And just asking the board if there is interest in looking at, not necessarily, maybe looking at redoing the Redfield wells, turning the water plant back on, but maybe looking at other water sources, other types of treatment. Or is the board fine keeping with Xenia? Just seeing if there's any interest in looking at alternatives to Xenia. First, get the documents you signed with Xenia and USDA to make sure that those timelines have passed, or what those agreements are, to see if you could even get out of them, or maybe that time's been long enough, you're not beholden to anymore. But just seeing if there's interest from the board in that. If there is, how much interest are you looking at? And then I can come back and present something for the board to look at. But I don't do that if the board's not interested in looking at other options other than Xenia.
I'd be interested.
I definitely, yeah. And to me, I have the full intent that none of these may work, but, you've seen the cost, own any of the cost increases, they're just pushed on us. And knowing what options we would have would be great. And I don't think the Redfield wells would probably bear out, but I don't know what other options there would be, so.
That'd be part of what we could look at, is what are other sources for wells, what are other sources for, maybe it's Southern Iowa gets a lot of their water from ponds. Maybe it's a surface water type. Just looking to see if one way or another of looking at something or not looking at something.
If this is something the board wants to pursue, then I will tell you, we've discussed this on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis for the entire time I've been here. It just doesn't seem to pencil out in any way, but maybe you'll find something we didn't find, but we're pretty familiar with what our options are. Have it pulled out of a hat. You have a pretty good idea of where it's gonna end up, but that's the board's decision.
Yeah, and I work with Ben on what that history has been, and with Pat and what that history has been, and maybe we'll come up with something, maybe we won't, but just seeing its interest with that.
And to me, we can put that in the minutes and share with the citizens, taxpayers, and ratepayers, and share that we're trying to mitigate rate costs as much as we can to try to find alternatives to slow that down. On the SIPCO side, also, if you're looking at solar, Chip had what town was that? I'm sorry, in eastern Iowa, that just got that large plant, or grant plant.
They got a large grant, Montezuma.
Yeah. They got 85% of theirs covered by the federal government, and that plant that's going down, they're being built out in Creston. I called the city, and it's a county deal or something else, not a city-involved deal. But if you can get 80-85% solar panels, how that tiers within your rate structure with SIPCO, to me, I'd like to see that looked at as well. To see, how they were able to tie the wind turbine in on the city side and still be able to, share that cost savings with utilities.
And we do have an electrical engineer that specializes in solar, so we could do that as well, if you're looking at that. I would propose maybe two different agreements, one for solar and SIPCO and electrical side, and one for the drinking water side.
I just want to understand the cost range, what this would run, but planning wise, and then, what exactly, the different options are, if that's possible to get that in that.
Yeah, if there's interest from the board of looking at those two things, I can bring something to your May meeting. No, I'm not looking for a motion, just kind of a consensus kind of thing. If the board says, oh my goodness, we've looked at there, been there, done, then that's fine too.
Absolutely, it's not gonna.
Okay, yeah, you're good.
I think what'll govern a lot of it with your purchase power is, does your agreement with Symeca and SIPCO allow you to produce more local power than what you currently produce with the current turbine?
But these guys are gonna need access to Tim Whipple, who is an attorney that can help interpret that agreement, correct?
If we
It's
get,
your call.
yeah, your call, but first we just need the agreements you have with Xenia and USDA and SIPCO, and so we can review those and
I'm just
And
thinking
make
of the
sure-
cost. I'm just, what does it cost for that engineering agreement for electric and water? That's not just gonna be you, that may involve Tim Whipple looking at agreements, that's all I'm
Right.
trying to.
those agreements, I mean, in the agreements say you're locked into buying water from Xenia,
Then there's
and
something
it's
more-
a
Sure.
gazillion dollars to get out of it,
Yeah.
then we'll throw up
Sure.
our hands and won't even bother looking, but we need, that's the first step, just to looking at what your agreements say and when they expire and what the escape clauses are. So if we can get those from Ash or Pat or whoever, that'd be the first
Cisco
step.
agreement on the water purchase agreement from.
And if you've got some of USDA as well.
We'll communicate those back.
Okay.
Should be it.
Okay, yeah, that'd be the first step. If I get those, then I'll review those. If we need to get an attorney involved, we can look at that, but
If you can tell, without, then sure.
yeah, I think it will,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Well, I'm not on the electric side.
Oh, right.
I got around that.
So yeah, we'll look at that, and then assuming looks like there's a way through both of those, then I'll come back with the agreement for the board. Okay, thank you.
Is it difficult to get rate histories from surrounding communities, like within 100-mile radius, to understand how our trend of rates over the last 10 years may differ from communities that do their own water versus purchasing it from another entity? I'm just trying to understand, are we really out of the norm with how our rates have increased over the last 10 years? Or are we somewhat in line? Are we really gonna be better off from a standpoint of producing our own water? Or are we just gonna be in the same mode of just not purchasing it from somebody else?
I think it's a good reminder that frankly, your user rates for water, I know some don't want to hear this, they are not tremendous compared to a lot of communities. The most complete report that I've seen, the city of Ames does an annual utility user rate study covers this purpose, covers water and wastewater or sewer. And it'll have both of those for a wide cross section of communities. It's perhaps focused more on, take that for what it's worth, as in terms of not necessarily being applicable, but it's a annual study they compile every year.
Is it out of realm to pull the other larger communities in the two counties just for comparisons that?
That's easy to find out, yeah.
I'm
If
just
they're
saying, is
not-
that something you could share with us next month?
Sure.
And the reason I asked, they all purify their own water, so give you at least a baseline if we went to this. Here's what.
So just tell me kind of which communities you have in mind.
Guthrie, Nora, Greenfield is the ones I would have in mind. Adair and Guthrie County, they both purify their own water. I mean, they're sitting on lakes and rivers, so obviously, we don't do that. So,
Any others for any
Well,
other
I was
folks?
I was in another town, Grundy Center, 20-some years ago, and they added a water softening citywide.
Yeah.
And that would be something else to consider too, because if we're talking a hard source and they're not so much, or they're softening the water, maybe they're not.
Yeah, Xenia softens.
Right.
Yeah,
And
so
some
you'd want
cities, some
to,
cities do too.
yeah, yes, they do. I would think to make an apples to apples comparison, you'd want to have a water plant that softens the water.
Right.
My thoughts, but
Well, that's
but I don't. I don't know. Because when we say Redfield Wells, is that just the river? They're drawing from the river?
Yeah,
Okay, so
Just
that's
shallow.
the same thing with Nora, right?
they're not, no, it's not from the river.
Okay.
It travels along the river, kind of out, you're going, as you go around that curve, aren't they out in there?
yeah, they're just shallow alluvial aquifers, they call them. They're shallow wells, they're only 50 feet deep. I mean, we're not pulling directly out of a river.
I don't know that,
know
it's still the
but
same sources, like what Guthrie's pulling from then, right? Don't they pull from that?
Guthrie, I wouldn't know.
Anyway,
Panora, I
we'll
think,
just
is
let
Panora.
We'll let you get.
lake. So
Yeah, they've got a lake,
So it's
But it'll give you options, I guess, comparisons to see.
But with Redfield, where they've got all the springs in Wascata, does that go, any of that go down to where we take from?
That, it's all connected.
All the same.
I mean, it all has something to do with the proximity of the river and the gravel formation in that valley. Because our wells are there, Dexter's wells are there, Redfield's wells are there.
Yeah, they're all in the sand and gravels from the old riverbeds from the raccoon.
So we can try to get comparisons in May and see what's.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah. And do you have that Ames information, Chip?
I'll bring that in May.
Okay.
That's here.
It's online too,
Yeah.
if you want to look sooner.
I mean, comparing to larger communities isn't, it's not relative. So
But it has smaller ones in there too.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
we're still on
Chip, one-
number 7.
sorry, one more question, Chip. I forgot to ask. The total dollar cost increase from Xenia, if, like the percentage, if you apply that back to our costs in the last year, what would that number be? That we're trying to spread.
Oh,
It's probably
just the bulk water cost?
Trying to figure it out. The 11.36% increase equates to what dollar amount?
Okay, so go to exhibit 5.
Like I said, it's probably there again.
That's the big paper.
Okay. So,
And then, this,
second page.
yeah, the second sheet, row 27. So that's your
Minus the
purchase
other?
water cost.
44,000, would that be right? So it's
11%. So let's look at fiscal year 22-23.
10.26.
11%, 10 to 11% on 395,000. So that's 39,000 or so.
Okay.
It's right in that range.
The cost difference would be 439,955 minus the 395,074. Would that be the right way to look at it?
I wouldn't pay as much attention to 439. That's a projection. It's not actual.
No, I'm
Let's look at the actual of
Okay,
FY 22-23,
Okay, so
and then compare it to prior years.
Okay, 395 minus 364.
And again, like I said, it's part of that cost is not just the usage, it's the usage as well as the per 1,000 gallons. So just consider that, I guess. It's 8%, and I'm not sure I can't remember what your 2022 adjustment was higher than that. So I think that
But I'm just trying to get to
you had a slight decrease in gallons purchased that year. That's
So
part of why that's lower.
looking through these rows on row 27, we paid Xenia $395,074.
Correct.
Okay, so in anticipation, well, actually through this, when this fiscal year's not over, we're gonna pay $440. So,
That's an estimate.
yeah, so the difference that we're looking at is about $40,000, $30,000 to $40,000 actual increase from Xenia. So if you guys would go down to the bottom of page 55, we're making.
Row 55.
Yeah, row 55. So, your net income is 500 to 300 to 350 to 360. So I mean, it's not like we have to raise rates tomorrow is all I'm trying to get at. So
That's
this
true.
is not gonna hurt anything. It would take some time, a couple months or whatever.
But you can't, of course, wait for 5 years.
I totally understand.
Isolating that cost change too, sort of start to think about that. How are we gonna if you're looking at a new water plant, how are you gonna get a new water plant paid for if that's your cost change? How long will it take you
The
to
payback.
be a break even? So it obviously be a while.
40,000 into 10 million is a long time.
Hey, ready?
Item number 6, we need to approve the increase of the Xenia. So,
Just there, not,
what's that?
we're just approved Xenia's not gonna be passed after.
Yeah, because we gave a rate increase, we need to approve that. Move for.
No.
The,
So,
Yes, we have,
This is the part of this that just is terrible. You know, that's really, it's just like, here it is.
we're doing what we can do, but.
No, you're right.
Yeah, I can't help you with that.
You can't charge them an administrative fee, can you?
I hope.
So moved in the motion.
Also,
Yeah. Moved by Crawford. Okay, moved by Crawford, second by Golden, how do you vote?
Crawford,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Sherman,
yes.
Belden.
Yes.
Avy, yes. Okay. Wind turbine generator maintenance.
Okay, that is not here, but he's giving you something in your packet. I don't know if you had a chance to read it or not. He would like to see this happening. Vistas. And I told him that I will try to ask them to approve it, but I can't guarantee. So I hope he can approve it, and he will comment to approve this. Moved by Golden,
I'll second.
seconded by Dan.
Crawford,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Sherman,
Yes.
Belden, Avy. Okay, city administrator reports.
I will go through really quick. We start with the financial statement. The first page of the financial statement shows that we have cash in the bank, local cash, 6.8. Go to page 2, months to date from July until the end of March. What shows on the paper here is a loss of 1.2 million. That's with the budget. If I take the budget out, shows a plus number of 699,000. Go to page 3, we still wasn't our budget. Our budget is 10 million, we spent 4, but we're gonna amend the budget next month because we're gonna pay that big loan that we have of the 6.8 million. So next month, I'll be closing that, amending the budget. Page 4, just month of March from the beginning to the end, it shows a plus number of 150,000 with the project, without the project, 154,000. The next page gives you the breakdown of the budget between sales tax, water, sewer, electric, insufficient fund, custom. That's for your information. We go to the lottery report. After that, the delinquent account, you only have one, will be shown on page 3 with the check mark on the right hand without saying names. To the next report to the delinquent account paid in full, no change, and that takes you all the way to page 3. After that is the payment agreement report, shows 7 people we added with the check mark on the right hand. The next report is paid in full payment agreement, 4 people with the check mark shown on page 2, one on page 3, another one on page 6. I have 2 of them on page 6, and that takes you to the end of the report on page 7. Next report, budget billing, no change. Next report, disease and bankrupt, no change, and the last one is the offset of ground. I think they changed the name of it, set off of ground, no change. And that takes care of the report.
Okay, public forum. Public forum.
Okay, now we are going to go into closed session. I'd like to have a motion to go into closed session.
I'll make it.
Moved by Ken, second by Dan, to go into closed session.
Elevated water storage tank possible closed session under 21.51C to discuss strategy with council in matters that are presently in litigation or where litigation is imminent, where its disclosure would be likely to prejudice or disadvantage the position of the governmental body in that litigation.
How do you vote, Brian?
Yes.
Neem? Shirley? Neem? Neem?
Yes.
Dan just,
Yes.
okay, we
Does that mean you're throwing us out?
don't really know what I can.